Hey guys, my name's Crystal Kenny, and I'm in love with creating. All things artistic and imagination involved. I'm an American girl who chased her creative dreams all the way to Paris, France, making a living using photography. This podcast takes you inside the stories of all the artsy folks I've met along the way and gives you that extra push to discover your creative gifts. The desire to create is deeply inside each and every one of us, and I give you the tools and inspiration to find a new way of living a more creative life. This is La Vie Creative, the podcast. Claudine Hemingway is a descendant of famed writer Ernest Hemingway. We bumped into each other at a party and decided to team up and dive deep into French history, but with a twist, by bringing a spotlight to those lesser-known creatives in France. This is History with a Hemingway. So welcome back to Paris History, Avec, Hemingway. Today we are talking about Johanna Van Gogh, which I know nothing about, and I'm sure Claudine's going to just fill our brains with lots of information, but apparently she was a fascinating woman, of course, and was basically Vincent Van Gogh's PR woman, from what I understand. So we're going to learn a lot about that and her connections to the Van Gogh family, and I'm excited to hear about this one, so I'll let Claudine take it from here.
Yeah, she is really fascinating and just absolutely amazing. And it's not a lot of people know about her, but we're going to hopefully change that because people need to know about how amazing of a woman she was. So Johanna Van Gogh was born, Johanna Bonger was born in Amsterdam in 1862. She was the fifth of seven children, and when she was little, she was really happy. And she was born into a musical family. Everybody, sang or played an instrument. She played the piano, and her family they would travel. They would go to different places and play music for friends and families, and so her parents let her focus on her education, which was something in 1862 it wasn't really a big thing. So they let her focus on her education, and she studied English, which is also kind of way back then. So, but studied English, and she basically got the equivalent of a college degree in English at school. So after that, she decided to go to the to London to go to the British Museum Library, and she was there working. And after that, she returned back to the Netherlands and began teaching at a girls' boarding school, and in the town of Utrecht. So she was up there teaching, and her brother, she had six other siblings, and her brother Andreas lived in Paris and had met the Van Gogh brothers. And so she was visiting one time, and she went there, and he took her over and to introduce her to Vincent and Theo Van Gogh. And, she was just kind of, meh, whatever. And
I don't care.
But Theo, apparently, she left quite the lasting impression because he was instantly, basically love at first sight with her. And she was kind of, she just she really wasn't that interested. And so months and months go by, and he comes up to Utrecht to visit her and basically pledges his undying love to her. Like, I love you. I've missed you. I just want to spend the rest of my life with you.
Wow. Intense.
She was completely freaked out.
Sounds like a Vincent move, actually.
I know. Well, and now it's now that's so that's something you could have today. But it's back then it was just oh, I think you're pretty. Okay, let's get married. It didn't really have but she was completely freaked out. She thought it was really strange that somebody she really didn't even know came to her and said how much he loved her. And so, yeah, very strange. And so but he wore her down. And so he, obviously she decided to change, her ways, and all of a sudden thought he was just, the sun and the moon. And so they ended up getting married on April 17th, 1889.
Oh, so it worked being a stalker.
It did work being a stalker then. Probably because they did, I think to be a stalker that you had to literally be a stalker. There's nothing digital.
So it runs in the family, stalking women, it sounds like.
It does. So 9 months later, right after they were married, they had a son, Vincent Willem Van Gogh. And they're living down in Paris, and Theo was doing all that he could do, to support his brother. Theo was working as in with artists and trying to get, like trying to sell their art and trying to support them. And so Johanna was there, and they have this little baby, and they're in Paris, and Vincent is down in the south of France. So Theo was a lot younger than Vincent, and he was the art dealer, and he had started working in the Hague office of a Paris art dealer, and then they sent him down to Paris to work. But he was constantly really a big supporter of Vincent. Even when he was back in the Netherlands, he would buy art supplies and he would send them to Vincent, and so that he could continue working. And so in 1886, Vincent comes to Paris, comes to Theo and says, "Oh, I'm here. I can't afford to live up there anymore." And Theo's living in this teeny, 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 tiny apartment. So he comes there, and but through Theo, he was able to. Vincent met Toulouse-Lautrec, Gauguin, Cézanne, Henri Rousseau, Pissarro, Seurat, like all of these. Now we all, obviously you know these people by just their last name.
Yeah, yeah.
So in 1888, Theo convinced Gauguin to go down to the south to see Vincent where he was, because Vincent was kind of having a hard time, and Vincent really wanted to create this his own little artist community, like a little colony, and have all these different artists come down there. But most of the artists, I think, saw that Vincent was a little volatile at times.
Yeah, you don't say.
Theo paid for all of Gauguin's living expenses, his travel, everything. Theo paid for everything.
He took care of him, basically.
Yeah, so while he was there, Theo was the one that was sending letters back up or Gauguin was there, he was sending letters back up to Theo saying, "This is what's going on with your brother right now." And, the famous ear cutting off episode, that was all down there in the south of France. And that was kind of a little bit about Gauguin, because Gauguin was going to leave. So, but during this whole time, Theo and Vincent were sending letters like daily to each other. Mm-hmm. And Theo saved every single one of those letters. Vincent did not. Or at least nobody's ever found any of them. So Theo saved all of these letters from his brother. And so Johanna loved, she was deeply in love with her husband. Like, they had a really good relationship. She really adored Vincent too. She, watched Theo, constantly being the one to support Vincent, mentally, financially, everything. But she also saw how it kind of took the toll on Theo, because it was hard for him. So on July 29th, 1890, at 37, Vincent decided to, he died. He decided to end his life. There's a lot of controversy of, did he do it? Was it somebody that shot him? But we won't get into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we won't. It's a long story there.
That's a whole other story. So Theo was, of course, crushed. And, he and Johanna had just gone to go visit them. And, Vincent, right, just about a month and a half before that, they took, baby Vincent, who was named after him, and went to go see him and thought he's actually really doing really well. And then, of course, a month or so later, he ends up, killing himself. Just a few months later, Theo ends up getting admitted to an asylum in the Netherlands. And he was going through a really hard time. He was having, he lost his brother, but he, was going depression and all these other things. So he was in the Netherlands, and 2 months later, on January 25th, 1891, he died. 6 months after Vincent died.
They were really close.
Very close. And so his doctor wrote in the paperwork that he died of heredity, chronic disease, overwork, and sadness.
Oh, this is so depressing.
I know, it's so sad. So So now Johanna, here she's left. She's been married, 2 years.
Oh, and that was so short.
Yeah, she has, this little baby, and she's lost her husband and her brother-in-law. And, I'm sure she was like, well, what exactly am I going to do? She's in Paris. She's in this apartment that's filled with paintings of Vincent's, just literally filled with paintings.
Oh,
because
wow.
when Vincent was alive, they only sold one painting while he was alive.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, so the apartment, of course, Theo is just, and he was an insanely fast painter. Like Gauguin was just like, you need to slow down. But he could do, a canvas or two sometimes in a day. So then after he died, the paintings that, they found tons of paintings that were still wet. Like they hadn't even
Wow.
tried yet. So here's Johanna in her apartment. Her brother comes down to visit her and says, what are you going to do with all this? You should just get rid of them.
Just like trash them?
Yeah. Yeah. But she said, oh no, she really loved Vincent. She obviously loved her husband, and she knew how important this was to her husband. And she was just like, no, I'm not going to do that. So she packs everything up and takes everything back to the Netherlands. She settles in this tiny town called Bussum and opens up a boarding school. But she did it. She was so smart because she picked that town because it was known for having a ton of art dealers and art critics.
Ah, that was smart.
Yes. So she goes to this little teeny tiny town, and she's there. She's got all these paintings, and she was still very close and in touch with a lot of Theo and Vincent's friends. Like Monet came and visited her and told her that his paintings are so wonderful. He didn't understand how somebody so depressed could paint with such beautiful colors.
Uh-huh.
And Pissarro came and said that the flowers look like people, like the sunflowers and stuff. Like to him, they look like people. And after I read that, I looked at it and I was like, I don't know.
That's a stretch.
So she's in 1901, she ended up remarrying. And she married a Dutch painter named Johann Gogh-Bonger, probably saying that wrong, but Gogh-Bonger, and he supported her in everything she was doing. So, she was spending so much of her time, with all these paintings, trying to figure out what she was going to do. But she ended up meeting all these different art dealers. And so one art dealer, Paul Cassera, said, I'll help you organize a exhibition of his paintings.
Oh.
And which had only happened one time when he was alive. He did something and it was, nobody really came, he didn't sell anything. So she said, okay, well, let's do this. And they did it in Berlin. She was organizing, exactly which paintings were going to go into it. It wasn't just like, come here and take all of them. It was like, she made sure to only give a few of them out at a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Women back then, of course, in that world were not, that there weren't women art dealers in the early 1900s. So in some ways it worked for her because they didn't really see her as a threat. They didn't see her coming. She just was, she was just like, oh, here I am with all these wonderful paintings. So they weren't really ever threatened with her. So they were really great about, working with her on this stuff. So before Theo died, he told her to never sell the paintings as a collection. Don't ever just sell like, here's everything, just sell them. He said, sell them one at a time to really build interest. So she did exactly that. And there was a woman named Helen Kroller Mueller. She was a very wealthy German woman that was living in the Netherlands, and she loved Van Gogh paintings. And so she started buying a few of them. She ended up actually having more than 91 paintings and drawings that he did. And so because she started doing that, and it kind of started creating this buzz because, here's this woman buying one or two at a time. Now you can see the whole collection in a museum that she donated everything to this museum in her name after she passed away. That's in Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. So they ended up, like Johanna was so smart because how she handled everything. So she was able to control the circulation. She was able to control the narrative of everything. But her biggest goal is that she wanted to have them in the public gallery. She wanted to have it so anybody could come see his paintings.
Yeah.
So she spent a lot of time at first over the years. Theo, as I had said earlier, saved all of his letters from his brother. And in these letters, or sometimes drawings, so there's some of his most famous paintings, and you could see these original letters online. And he's actually like working out, like, it could be the picture of his bedroom, the yellow bedroom, and he's like basically sketching it out in this letter to his brother. And then he's making notes on this is going to be this color and this is going to be that color, which is just fascinating now to see. So in these letters is basically, here's Vincent in everything that's going on in his mind to his brother, what the ups and the downs and everything. So she started actually translating and transcribing all of these letters. And
Oh, that was so smart.
she would release little pieces of it at a time. So as she did that, it built up the mystic, and people wanted to know more about Vincent because back then they didn't know Vincent like we know now. Like now we are like, oh, he went through all these things. He was, kind of went off the deep end at one point, but they didn't know that then.
Yeah, of course.
So in 1912, she lost her second husband and headed to.
Oh no! Again.
Yeah, I know, another one. So she headed to New York in 1915, where her son with her son, and she stayed there for 4 years. And while she was there, she was working like night and day on the letters and putting them all together. And it was just such an insight into his mind. But she wanted to be very careful that the story from the letters didn't overtake the paintings. Like she wanted to make sure that the paintings spoke first and told the story, and then it was like, here's the backstory, a little bit of who he was. So she did that and then only did little pieces of it, releasing them for almost 14 years.
She's such a great PR person.
Yeah, she totally is. So she also kept her own very detailed diary from the time she was very little. And so her son later released some of it. And she wrote in one of them, she said, "Imagine for one moment my experience when I came back to Holland, realizing the greatness and the nobility of the lonely artist's life."
Oh.
It just like almost makes me cry when I hear it. It's like, oh
yeah, that's so wow.
Yeah. So as her son's growing up, here he is living in this home that's, covered with Van Goghs all over the walls, like over 200 paintings she kept in the house. And so she, but one of her very favorite ones was one of the sunflower ones. And he everybody knows Van Gogh's sunflowers. And he felt that those were his, that was his flower, because everybody's doing roses and peonies and everything. And he's like, nobody's doing sunflowers.
I like that he switched it up. He was right. No one did do sunflowers.
Yeah. So in 1924, a gentleman from the National Gallery in London named Jim End came over to see her, and they were given a very large amount of money from Samuel Courtauld, who was a very wealthy art enthusiast, and he gave them this money with the express intent to buy modern artists. And so Jim would come visit Johanna and try to convince her to sell this one specific sunflower painting. And she said no. She's like, no, it's not for sale. She saw this painting every day of her life for 30 years, and she didn't want to part with it.
Oh.
And it was also her husband's favorite painting that Van Gogh did. So she was just like, nope, it's not for sale. But Jim kept persisting, and he didn't let up. And right before she died, she sent him a letter and said that she would sell it to them.
Ah.
And it was mostly because Vincent had spent time in London, and he had visited that same museum. And she thought this was exactly what he would want, that he would want to be, in this museum where, he once visited, and now one of his, becomes one of his most famous paintings is now hanging on the wall.
I like that. That was the reason she allowed that to happen.
Yeah, it's just amazing. I just love this story so much. So, he believed that the sunflower is also his symbol, because it's the bright yellow and but they're not all perfect. Some of the sunflowers he painted, some of the flowers in the painting are like dying, like they don't have the petals on anymore. They look kind of, old and a little creaky. But I could see looking at that and if you look at a bunch of them together and know what he was going through mentally at that time that he painted those, you could see that. Like that definitely comes through in those paintings, and it's just kind of heart-wrenching. So, but in 1914, she ended up publishing all three volumes filled with their letters, and there was more than 650 letters. 650 letters, basically all from Vincent de Theo. They had, since over time, they found more. They found even more letters of like ones that Vincent had sent other people, and they've added on to these things. But and then she took a ton of time. She started to take time to translate them all then into English as well.
That's fascinating. I mean, it's so crazy that she did all this when she was really only with both of them for 2 years.
Yeah, only 2 years.
That's
And first,
wild.
and then first they freaked her out.
Yeah, of course. They were being creepy.
Yeah. But the letters gave such an inside access to his art. And I saw this one quote that says, "You could hang a painting on a wall, but that's not how people get to know an artist or his work." And it's so true because I have so many different artists that I love. Sometimes it's like Delacroix, who I fell in love with, Liberty Leading the People, but then I did so much research on the man that I ended up being like loving everything that he did, and then his art takes on a whole new meaning. So, I think that like Van Gogh, you could look and be like, oh, his paintings are so bright and cheerful and lots of yellow. But, knowing more about his story, it draws you to them even more.
Yeah, I think it's so much important when you look at any piece of art to know the history behind it. That's what I love about going to museums. If you just look at something, you're like, meh.
Right.
But when you know what they went through and what mediums they used, it's so much more interesting.
Yeah, and the story of the people in the paintings, and it's just, and why they painted it, or just any of that stuff is just so incredibly fascinating.
It really is. And amazing what she did to help them.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely without Johanna, we would not know. There might not be a Vincent van Gogh. Because her brother said destroy these if they had left him there, and with those, I think without those letters we wouldn't really know who he was at all.
That's so interesting. I would never think it was her, and she doesn't really get recognition for that. Like we talk about with a lot of the women in this podcast, I would have never have known that. Why is that not talked about more?
Yeah. And I mean, I've talked with people that know a lot, are very big fans of art. And I've mentioned her name and they haven't known. They were just like, what? And I'm like, no. I was like, oh, Johanna Van Gogh. And oh, she did this. And, she was basically, was a guardian of his entire life and his legacy. And, they're just like, oh, I didn't know that. Like, it's just kind of, I mean, what she did is so amazing and monumental that, like I said, I don't think we'd know Vincent van Gogh.
I don't think so either. It wouldn't be the same. It's really interesting and sad also. It's like, why didn't anyone talk about her? But I just can't believe it blows my mind that only 2 years spent with them. And she did so much for them. I mean, it just proves how much she loved them.
Yeah, she devoted the rest of her life. And her second husband was, like that's fine. I mean, he was a painter too, so he probably understood. But on September 2nd, 1925, she died in the Netherlands at 62 years old. Again, not really that old.
No.
Not 62-year-old is not that old. So her son, she only had the one child, Vincent, and so he kind of picked up where she left off. And basically did all that he could as well. And they had set up a Van Gogh Foundation that the family did. And in the 1960s, it ended up selling the remaining 200 paintings that was in her original possession. And it's what actually became the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam that opened in 1973.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense. I love that museum. I visited years ago. It's huge. There's so much there. And that all came from her.
Yeah, I definitely want to go see that. And then now knowing that, those were ones that she had, I'll be like, oh my gosh.
Even more meaningful.
Yeah. But she said, in her diary, she wrote that that Vincent gave her this serenity, that there was like something being attached to him. It gave her just this peacefulness. And she said, I wish I could make you feel the influence Vincent had on my life.
That is so sweet.
No, it just makes me want to cry.
It really gets you to know him a little bit better because we only know his works. We don't really know his personality that well.
Yeah, we don't. And so, but, here in 1914, Theo died in the Netherlands and he was buried there. But in 1914, she actually had his remains moved from Utrecht to Auvers-sur-Loire, which is where Vincent's buried, as everyone knows. And he was buried next to Vincent, next to his brother, which I just also think is so like amazing that she ended up, no, he needs to be together.
That's very thoughtful. Once again, 2 years and so many things.
2 years. But if you go visit it or you see pictures of it, I'll post a picture of it. But their grave is covered with this ivy. And the ivy was actually taken from Dr. Gachet's property, who was the doctor that was there with Vincent at the end of his life. And he did actually this really amazing painting of him that's in the Orsay. Dr. Gachet actually had his own, he treated actually a lot of different artists, and he amassed his own huge art collection. Most of it's all been donated to the Musée d'Orsay, and I wrote something about it because that's the other thing. Like, you go to museums, it's just take a second and look at every one of those plaques and what it says. And what one of my favorite things to do is to see where it came from. So the provenance of anything is fascinating to me. And it'll say sometimes, like, Caillebotte, who was a huge French artist, he also had this huge collection. And a lot of the paintings on the fifth floor in the Impressionist Gallery at the Orsay were ones that he actually had. So if you get close enough, you read those plaques, just look at like where it came from, or like it donated from. And then it's like, here Vincent did this painting of Dr. Gachet. He gave it to him. He kept it until the end of his life. And then it came to the Orsay, which is just so amazing.
It really is. Like, wow, that history. I wish I would have known about her before and like everything. I mean, everyone knows Vincent, but this is so much more interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't think we would know Vincent van Gogh.
Nope. I mean, like you said, they probably would have destroyed all his stuff.
Yeah, I think he would have been lost, or it would have been one of those things like, there's 2 or 3 paintings remaining, and that's it. But, by doing that first exhibition in Germany was actually one of the first places that really kind of fell in love with Vincent van Gogh. And they actually ended up having a lot of forgers there too, because
really?
he was so popular that, everybody was just absolutely adored him, and they were teaching him in the art schools. And, here's these young kids like recreating the sunflowers and stuff. And so, he was pretty big in Germany first before anybody else really knew him.
Huh. I didn't know that. Yeah. Once again, learning.
Yeah. I think it's also that woman that had a huge collection. She was German too. So.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what a fascinating history. And once again, like, they were all so connected, and it's so obvious how much the brothers loved each other and supported each other up until the end. And then his wife carried on that legacy.
Yeah, I think she's pretty amazing. She's, like Rose Valland, it's kind of like she's the other one that I'm like, no, I want everyone to know who she was.
Of course. Are there any books about her that we should read?
Not very much. Not that I've really found, at least not that many in English.
Huh, okay.
But I'll be looking and see what I can find. We might need to do one for the book club.
Yeah, exactly. I would love to read more about her because it's obvious how much she cared.
Yeah. Amazing woman.
Well, thank you so much again, Claudine, and tune in next week for another famous woman in French history.
Merci. Thank you for listening to Paris History Avec Hemingway. If you want to find out some more, you could always find me on my Instagram page, Claudine Bleu Blanc Rouge, and that's BLEU, as in the French way to spell it. And each day I post a daily history lesson about a person or a place or something in Paris, or it's lots of fun facts. And then also at ClaudineHemingway.com, where you can also sign up for my newsletter there.